hello again. So, by the end of this lecture, this is what I'm hoping you will know, okay? These are the key things that I want you to focus on. You should know why statistics are important. What are statistics, okay? So we're going to talk about specific things. I want you to know the difference between descriptive and inferential statistics. In the first half of this course, we're going to deal strictly with descriptive statistics. The other half is going to be dedicated with inferential statistics. And then if you ever go to have a master's or a PhD, you can dedicate your whole life to inferential statistics, and then you can come back and hate me or love me. So inferential statistics are probably the trickiest, the hardest. So you should know the difference between the two, okay? Another thing that we're going to talk very briefly, because this is not really the topic of this course, but it is related because it has to do with data collection. We're going to talk about a little bit about how we collect data, okay? Although you're going to talk more about that in epidemiology or study design or anything like that. And then finally, we're going to talk about the four basic classes of studies, which is essentially is a type of study. We design a study, and then that's how we collect it. Study design will dictate how you collect data and also how you interpret your data, okay? Because data collection affects interpretation a big time. So what are statistics, okay? So statistics are the following steps that you see right there. Data collection, organization, analysis, interpretation, and presentation. Okay, the idea here is that we collect data and we use that data to describe a phenomenon. So why do you care? Why do you have to take statistics? Well, we like it or not, people, it's everywhere, okay? So even if you have a job that does not entail analyzing data, to be honest with you, just as an informed consumer, it's a good idea to have a good understanding of data. There's a lot of garbage statistics out there. I mean, I listen to the news and I really want to hit my head on the wall sometimes with some of the things that I hear because they make no sense. Okay, depending on the study design, some of the findings can be very questionable. And unless you have a pretty good understanding of how the data was collected and how it was interpreted, really somebody can fool you or direct you to the wrong conclusion. So I would say it's everywhere, and it's a good idea that you understand some basic statistics and what. So the two major categories of statistics, you need to know that, and you need to know the difference. That's a test question, I guarantee you. Are you going to see it on quizzes? You're going to see it on the midterm, okay? So descriptive statistic, as the word implies, it's a major category. And this is when we collect data and we can describe a phenomenon. We're not inferring, okay? We're describing. For example, if I ask everybody in my 349 class, how many pounds do you weigh, okay? I can calculate the average for the girls and for the boys, okay? There's nothing to infer here. I collected data, I analyzed it, and I run the mean. So usually mean, mode, okay? These are ways that we kind of like describing our data. That is descriptive statistics. On the other hand, inferential statistics, we're collecting data from a sample and we're inferring something about the population. As you can imagine, okay, depending the type of research question we have, it would be impossible to collect data on every single body out there. Like, for example, I was studying induced earthquakes, human-induced earthquakes in Oklahoma, and I wanted to see what was the effects on the people. Is it possible for me to go to Oklahoma and interview every single body that lives there in that state? No. So in that case, I selected the most affected locations, okay, and I interview a sample, and then from the sample, I'm going to infer something about those areas, okay? Simply because it is impossible to get access to everybody for various reasons. Number one is for sure it's expensive. Number two, a lot of people are going to say, no, thank you. I don't want to be part of your research study. But then we assume, okay, especially if your sample is randomly selected, that the sample you selected somehow, whatever opinions they will share with you, it will be representative of the total population. Okay, that's the idea. Now, how do we gather data? Okay, we have different ways of gathering data, but I would say the most common ones would be surveys and observations. Surveys is when you literally handing out a survey to somebody and they're filling it out. Now, again, they're more objective, I would say, than the observations, simply because you're allowing the individual to fill it out. Yet, try to think about it. The way you phrase a question, you can trick people. Okay, and that is why how you design a survey is very crucial. See, that is another thing that you don't think about it when you're reading findings about the research. You don't think like, oh gee, what was this survey, what were the questions that they're being asked in order for the people to derive to these findings. Yet it's something that it can really play a role. Observations on the other side, right? It's you're observing a population or a sample and you're inferring something about them, or you're making notes. As you can see, there's some subjectivity in the whole thing. Yet I would say the majority of researchers who are involved with observation studies, they get a lot of training, so they're trying to control their personal biases. Now let's talk about the 4 types of studies. Very brief, okay, this is not an EPIC class, but what I want you here to do is like connect the dots as to the type of study, how we collect the data, okay, and what that means, how we interpret those findings, okay? So the 4 basic types would be retrospective study, prospective study, analytic or correlational study, and finally experimental. So let's briefly talk about each one of them. Retrospective study. As you can tell, a retrospective study is also known as a case control study. It is retrospective in nature because you're looking backwards, you're looking back in time, okay? So basically you have patients, for example, who have a disease and you want to see what they were exposed to. You compare the exposure rate in a controlled group, okay, with the people who don't have the disease. An example would be lung cancer patients, right? You can see their smoking rates. You can have access to their records to see if they were former smokers or not. Then you can compare their smoking rates to that of people who did not smoke, and hence you can come up with some kind of an association to see whether there is any relationship between smoking and cancer. Okay. So what are the advantages of case control studies? Well, for sure they're cheap. I mean, think about it. You have the data already. You don't need to go out there and collect data, and you're simply looking at associations, right? Now, the information is useful. You can say, hey, these people were sick and had higher exposure to this. Now, a major disadvantage would be that how do you find a comparable control group, okay? Sometimes we don't have enough information, okay, or good enough information to really compare the 2 groups. So the control group is necessary in order to really see any significant differences between a behavior and an outcome, okay? So, and also it's very important to have some baseline information. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes it is not, because apparently any comparison that you're doing between cases and controls, you want the cases and controls to be as similar as possible. If they're not similar, okay, like let's just say I'm comparing smoking habits and cancer, and let's just say your current cases are all individuals who are like in their 50s, and then you go get your controls and they're a bunch of like vibrant 20-year-old healthy adults. Well, that would be an unsuccessful experiment, right? I mean, comparison, think about it. You don't control apples and oranges. You want your cases to look exactly like your controls. The only thing that should be different is the exposure to tobacco, to smoking, okay? In order to make any reasonable comparison. All right. Prospective studies. A prospective study is also known as a cohort study. It really means looking ahead. In other words, we collect data on exposure variables before the disease happens. So what would this type of study look like? Well, think about it. I can have some baseline testing right now, and I can assess everybody's health, and I can see who has, for example, cardiovascular disease, who has diabetes, who is healthy, who's not. All right, and then I can at the same time monitor their diet. I can see access to healthcare, how frequently they get checks, and so on and so forth. And then I can follow these individuals for 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years. I mean, there have been cohort studies that they're so long that the primary investigator died, and then another investigator came in to continue the study. Um, they're wonderful because they can really provide a lot of insight as far as looking at different variables and seeing how they interact. Again, they cannot be used for causation. And the reason is that you cannot use for causation is because you can really not control everything. As much as we want to control everything, it is impossible to follow people over time and really control every single variable that can probably affect their outcome. But nevertheless, we can see association as to who developed what kind of a lifestyle they led, and that will provide us with a lot of cues, okay? They're very interesting studies, but a major disadvantage is when you follow people for 20, 30 years, boy, that can get expensive, okay? And it takes a lot of time and effort and resources, okay? Analytic study, correlation study, I would say this is the worst type, okay? And this is the one that you should be very aware. So anytime you read a paper or you hear something in the news and they tell you something that's too wild to believe, I would say the first thing you should look to see if it's a cross-sectional study. And if it's a cross-sectional study, do not assume that everything that's being said is true simply because an association does not equal causation, okay? I vividly remember a student bringing me in my personal health class a study that she found that took place, I think was in Austria, and was showing that people who consume a vegetarian diet have a higher percentage of cancer. And the you had to really study the methodology to see that it was, you cannot really say that being a vegetarian increases your chance of getting cancer, because the way they collected the data was the sample were people who had already cancer, and some of them were cured and then changed their diet and became vegetarian afterwards. I mean, if you didn't read that part and you simply saw that there's a significant association between being a vegetarian and developing cancer, you would say, oh my gosh, I'm never going to eat a piece of broccoli ever again in my life. I'm going to stick with my steak. All right? That is not the case, okay? So these people converted to vegetarianism simply because they were trying to follow a healthier lifestyle after they had a diagnosis of cancer, okay? But when somebody recovers from cancer, the probability, depending the type of cancer, of having, I guess, the tumor metastasize in a different body part, or just having a recurrence of cancer is very high. Okay, so hence there was a significant association between being a vegetarian and cancer. That it was, I guess, interpreted completely wrong. Okay, and I'm not sure who funded that particular study, but this is not the type of study that we can ever assume any kind of causation. Okay, we can see some associations which then can inform different type of studies, but that's about it. We cannot take an experimental or a clinical trial or the gold standard. Okay, that is when you compare the efficacy of one treatment versus another, or no treatment at all. What is the group that receives no treatment called? That's the control group, right? Yes. So you want to see if the treatment does better than the control after a period of time. These are the kind of studies that we tend to use before we develop vaccinations. Like right now, we are in the middle of a pandemic. They're trying to figure out a vaccine. So there's some people that are going to get the placebo and some people who are going to get the actual vaccine. The idea is, are the people who are getting the vaccine protected versus the people who got absolutely nothing? Now, experimental studies are excellent in many ways simply because this is the only type of study that we can I guess, assume causation as to one thing causing something or having an impact on something. Like in this case, the vaccine hopefully will have an impact on coronavirus, will protect your body. But sometimes they can be problematic or very difficult to conduct simply because I guess anytime that you're going to provide a treatment to a group of people, it needs to be ethical. So you can never give them something that would harm their health, okay? Hence, that's where informed consent is come for. That's when we use IRB, because we want to make sure that our subjects are informed, okay? They know any possible risks and benefits to the study. And again, before we involved any human subjects, right, we're going to run all kinds of experiments before that. We're going to get into animal studies, and then eventually we're going to like use humans when we're pretty certain that we have dealt with the most severe side effects, okay? Again, experiments can be expensive, okay? And also they can be very difficult as far as finding the right people that we need and subjecting them to something that it is ethical. Well, that's it for today. This is our first lecture. Let me know if you have any questions. Ciao.